Any questions? No.
Chris Stanley from the University of Sydney. Got a question for you, Marcus.
Thank you.
In your cost-benefits analysis, how do you assess who benefits and who bears the costs? I mean, you could have a situation where one group of people bears all the costs and the benefits accrue completely to another group.
Yeah. Look, this is one of the big philosophical debates in economics. The working rule, and this is probably an answer that disappoints you or perhaps reinforces the stereotypes of economists. In principle, you set distributional effects aside. So, in the common application of cost-benefit analysis, you look at whether there is a net community benefit from whatever it is you're doing, the planning initiative, the regulation, or whatever. So, what that is saying is that as a result of this intervention, the community as a whole will be made better off. Now, if there is that could mean, as you said in your question, it could mean that 90% of the benefits flow to a very small number of people and most of the costs flow elsewhere. Economists would say that's just a distributional issue. It's not what they call an efficiency issue. Efficiency is about maximising community welfare. We should have redistributional mechanisms to make sure that the winners compensate the losers. So it's tax and other mechanisms or provision of in-kind benefits. In truth, the policymakers are keenly interested in the distributional effects. So typically you do a cost-benefit analysis which works out the net community benefit, and then you have a distributional analysis. And I think we all know as practitioners is if you have a very unfair distribution of effects, then the project is a non-goer, notwithstanding, yes. Okay, I note the little, yes. Anyway, that's my answer.
Actually, if I may, I was going to ask you a very similar question, and it goes to this question of the non-negotiables, Marcus, because really the non-negotiables as you position them is, first of all, the recognition that the modelling and our knowledge is not perfect. And so there's almost a parallel process, which is that we articulate these values, which are essentially a political process, and that's why the distributional effects are in fact very politically charged, obviously. And so I guess the question becomes, just to bring it down to ground, for example, in the bays, I think it's fair to say a question would be, what is the basis for the government expending a lot of money there, investing in that, if it's not very clear how it benefits the broader city, except through greater profitability or something which we then have to assume and trust is going to be redistributed equitably. Yeah. And I think it's a real question to do with our democratic processes, I think, which don't no longer match up with the involvement of the private sector and the way that the public's actually cut out of these processes, because it actually becomes a local interest rather than a metropolitan interest. So, yeah. Have you had some experience in Victoria on that, or would you like to comment on those problems?
Well, I do think, this vertical fiscal imbalance issue, as dry a topic as it is, it's insidious, it's corrosive. So, in the case of the Bays precinct, let's say the state government was enlightened and came up with a balanced, inclusive, sustainable vision for that place with a long-term view, so it made a healthy part of the city, and as Helen pointed out in her examples, created a much more productive, prosperous place that added to the economic sustainability of the city. Let's say they somehow... The sad thing is that for every dollar of tax that would be generated as a result of that improvement in productivity, for every dollar of tax that's generated, 2/3 of them would go to the Commonwealth. Now, if it was New York, it would be the other way around. Those funds would be collected locally, and the politicians could say to their constituents, look, investing in this was a winner for us all. Let me show you the ways. VFI, vertical fiscal imbalance, get interested in it because it's a really important topic.
My name's Pat Fensham. I'm a colleague of Marcus's. And if Marcus hadn't been following Phil, I would have had to leap up with a couple of points about Philip's talk. So I hope Marcus's presentation has defended cost-benefit analysis to some extent. But it was interesting, a couple of examples that Philip used, and this is why there is good cost-benefit analysis and badly applied cost-benefit analysis. He referred to the Sydney Harbour Bridge as a visionary project, and Marcus and I are both co-authors of a paper in the Asia Pacific Architectural Review, which cites the Sydney Harbour Bridge as being a reason why cost-benefit analysis is not done well now, and the sort of long-term benefits that would accrue, that have accrued from something like the Sydney Harbour Bridge need to be part of the equation in terms of the cost-benefit analysis. And the other thing is the City of Sydney engaged us to review the Glebe Island work by Aisel Allen, and we tore it to pieces. So you'll be pleased to know that there's good economists out there.
Any other questions?
I'm just interested in just asking from an economic perspective. I'm a layperson, so it's probably totally ignorant. There's a lot of contention at the moment, or there is some contention at the moment about WestConnex and the value of WestConnex and how it's being put together. And my understanding is that those papers are not accessible to see the cost-benefit analysis. And look, I have a little bit of banking experience, so I understand the upfront costs that the bankers take out and whatever, and I understand a little bit about PPP. Something like that, can I just ask a very broad question? Perhaps you can't answer, or perhaps you can. How should that be done so that we as the public know that we're getting good value out of something like that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I know a little bit about WestConnex, but I know more about the East-West link in Melbourne. and the ironic thing is that projects like that can be regarded as transformative. They're a little bit like Philip's Sydney Harbour Bridge, or the underground rail system. They have dynamic and long-term effects, and one of the serious shortcomings of cost-benefit analysis is that our brains aren't big enough to trace. Even our computational brains aren't big enough to trace second, third, and fourth round effects. So the rule of thumb, and it's just a convention, it's not in the theory, the convention is you take into account first round effects on the cost side and the benefit side. So if you're looking at WestConnex or East-West Link, you'd say, well, the first round effect is mainly about travel time savings, and in terms of benefits, and the costs are what it costs to build the thing. And I can tell you now, the benefit cost ratio doesn't look good, because you're not taking into account the true value of the project, which is to change the structure of, and hopefully we don't get into a debate about whether roads are good or not, but the cost-benefit analysis that the government would have commissioned probably hasn't dealt adequately. There are forays into wider economic benefits, but basically we don't have a good enough understanding yet about how these projects change the city permanently and in profound ways. So one of the reasons why governments keep them secret for a couple of reasons. First of all, because they don't feel adequately accountable to the metropolitan community for the reasons that I mentioned. They don't stand for that. But secondly, because the benefit cost analysis probably doesn't properly reflect the merits of the project. Now, interestingly enough, the underground rail loop in Melbourne, they did do a cost-benefit analysis on that, because that came on relatively late in the piece, in the sort of 70s, when cost-benefit analysis really started to be used a lot. And it actually returned a benefit cost ratio of less than 1. But because it was in the days when politicians still made decisions and they weren't completely dominated by their treasuries, the Cabinet said, well, look, we don't care about that benefit cost thing. We're going to go ahead and build it, because they had a sense of the wider structural transformative effects of the project. Now, so we've kind of got trapped now, where we've got these important projects where the actual economics is underdone. And so that's one of the reasons, I'm not defending secrecy, but that's one of the reasons why I think governments keep these business cases a little bit under wraps.
Can I just redirect that to as a question to Helen, or an observation, which Helen might be good for you to. Because one of the questions I was going to ask Helen was just how significant she thought the not seeing these projects as transport. I mean, if you think about WestConnex, what is it? You know, it's a tunnel with a whole lot of disruption to the adjoining streets, and it's on ramps, and it's got a transport function. And when you look at some of the infrastructure projects that Helen was talking about, that Philip was talking about, it's actually how do you sell, it's not just selling the vision as, you know, things moving faster, but it's actually all of these other projects which are intricate and actually quite a compelling vision, in the sense that it's actually a very clear, broad view, let's say, of an entire area. And I just wondered if you could comment on that, because it goes to what Marcus is saying in terms of, you know, how do you actually engage the public with this broader view? It's not just a transport project. In fact, it's actually an urban set of urban projects.
Well, I mean, it just seems to me that any urban investment has to have multiplier effects. I mean, if you're not assessing it on its multiplier effects, then it really shouldn't get up. If it's singular in its purpose, if it's a road and it takes vehicles, well then it's probably not really worth investing in. It has to actually have these catalytic impacts. And it seemed that in all the projects that I looked at, it was seen as a cost of entry, that you use that opportunity, you use that huge, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars or whatever it was investment to actually catalyse all these other things you've been dying to do for as many years as possible, to bring them all together to actually launch them into the universe. And so I think that basic economic analysis has to say, what is the catalytic impact of this project to the city or the community or the place in which it's going to inhabit? But I don't know how you do that, Marcus, but it seemed a cost of entry. Yeah.
I think this might be the final question, because there's still plenty of wine and food outside, so...
My question is directed at Helen and Marcus, and I'm wondering how receptive government agencies in New South Wales and Victoria might differ, and how they might promote the idea of a representative forum based on a set of principles which clearly would attract a wide spectrum of interest in the community. A set of principles that was going to minimise conflict, which you always attract when you set up a body like this. Could you comment on that, please?
Well, I'm a public servant, so I think that we all need to exercise our democratic right and privilege. And when you see people exercise that democratic right with responsibility, I mean, extraordinary things can be achieved. And I think that we have, we've rolled over in a way in Sydney, and I think that we need to step up and take it on, take it on. If we want the city, you get the city you deserve. And if we say, Barangaroo is good enough, or we say WestConnex is good enough, or whatever, then, well, that's what we'll get. But I think if we want to engage in the urban debate, then as citizens of the city, we need to be part of the solution and the dialogue. But as a public servant, I don't determine these processes. Politicians determine the processes of the Bays precinct. And we engage with that.
I quoted Gough earlier, and I don't know if I'm misquoting Gandhi now, but I think he actually said, to gain power, you must first give it away. So what you would actually need is, in my opinion, is some kind of... We're not going to get a Greater London Authority or something like that. I just think that's a bridge too far at the moment. But we could have an intermediate organisation, a metropolitan commission or planning authority.
Well, yeah, I think that. I think if we do get the Metropolitan Planning Commission, that is a very good step.
However, I just want to put this rider on it. It mustn't be owned solely by the state government. If it just becomes a functionary of the state government, it won't have that democratic mandate. But what if it had a governing council or a governing board that was comprised of delegates from local governments? And I'm not saying every single local council sends a delegate, but you might have a series of sub-regions in Greater Sydney region, and each region could elect an elected member, electoral college style, to sit on the governing board of this Metropolitan Commission. The government would reserve the right to make its own appointments, and maybe it would just have the margin, the voting margin, but that would at least be a forum that that the wider metropolitan constituency could identify with and have some involvement in. And that commission could look after in fact, I would give that commission the carriage of projects like the Bays Precinct or Barangaroo, because I think you'd get a different kind of project if you had that lens on it.
Wouldn't be quite so financial.
No taxation without representation or whatever. You'd have to really look after. You'd have to look at You'd also have to look at your tax bases as well. And one of the interesting things that is bubbling up in the debate right now as we speak, related to that VFI stuff, is that people like Terry Moran, former head of the Prime Minister's Department in the last government, Gillard government, interesting paper in the Fin Review today saying, look, we really do need to roll back payroll taxes and ramp up land taxes on a very low, ramp up land taxes, but at a low rate, but on a broad base. And the Metropolitan Planning Commission should have control of that tax base, so that we're getting more towards the American kind of system where the city can make its own decisions about what infrastructure it wants to build rather than Canberra deciding. And, I know we've just laid Gough to rest, but, it was the beginning of the end in many ways when we all started to look to Canberra to solve our problems, because they know nothing about cities.
Can I just
I just add that I did want to stress that the agencies collaborate and agree on a set of principles that would have some standing with government, state government or local government. They could put a value on the amenities as you described, and that figure would be formalised once that forum reached a critical political mass.
Yeah. Sounds good.
On that point, I'd encourage you to put those principles in writing and upload them. That's what the website's for. I truly, sincerely encourage you all to make comment, even submit, considered papers. I think we've heard the problems, we've heard the opportunities and where I think we all want to get to. From those fantastic presentations, and I think, Marcus, there's almost a glimmer of a bit of process and some reform that might even get us there.
Can I just ask one question?
Of course.
If you had to choose between the three professions, look after
So, thank you very much, and it's a fantastic session. Thank you very much, all of you.